Long before the ministry of Jesus, long before the philosophy of Plato, long before even the Hebrew patriarchs wandered in the deserts of Canaan, there was a king who knelt down beside his dead friend and asked the one question that no priest, no god, and no civilization has ever been able to answer. Is this all there is? His name was Gilgamesh. His story is the oldest surviving written narrative in human history, the first existential crisis. And though it was etched in clay 4,000 years ago, it is more intimate, more honest, and more human than most stories even told today. Yes, it is epic, and yes, there is adventure, and there is love, and there is betrayal, and there are gods, and there are demons, and there are monsters, but it's so much more than that. It is a story about loss and grief and facing death, about being terrified to lose the people that you love and even yourself. So, I know this is a bit different. Most of our Thinking Thursday episodes focus on these wonderful, great thinkers, these rebellious minds in history that moved us ever forward, even if only an inch at a time in moral progress or the fight against tyranny or religion. But today we focus on the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is a wonderful story. My favorite version of it is the one by Stephen Mitchell. I encourage you guys all, if you are truly interested in the story, to get this one. The first 70 pages are an introduction that are on their own fascinating. And then there's this really cool version by Herbert Mason. It's a verse narrative of the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, especially if you're like reading it to your kids or something. This is a really cool way to have it. I love this story. It is one of my favorites. You may or may not be very familiar with it, but either way, I'm so excited to share it with you today. There's no one named author, there's no school of thought here or particular philosophy being forced. There's no manifesto. Instead, this is a window into humanity, the earliest philosophical awakening of mankind. And the reason I think that we can put Gilgamesh the story right up there next to Hypatia or Spinoza is because in a world that is probably even more so than our own, completely saturated with the ideas of gods, mystical powers, kings that ruled by divine right, someone dared to imagine that even the most powerful among them could not outrun death, that death, even above the gods, was the thing to be contended with. And in so doing, you could then question the gods, which we see in this story. That meaning isn't just handed down and something that we should accept by way of what we're told, but that we should seek it out, even painfully so. So yes, I want to cover this story as a symbol of when thinking began. Not that we didn't have a long history of people obviously thinking, but this is when we can put a pin in it. It starts here in terms of a written record. But ironically enough, Gilgamesh has been, for the most part, forgotten. The epic was buried in ruins, untranslated, unread for thousands of years. It's almost eerie and amazing to think about that this wealth of knowledge about our earliest storytelling was just sitting there in wait for so long. But when it was uncovered in the 19th century, right as biblical literalism is peaking, it raised questions that no theologians were ready to have to grapple with. Why does this ancient story echo of Genesis? Who told it first? And why is its narrative so much more human and honest than what came after? We're going to get to some of those questions. First, I want to tell you the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh. I won't be able to do it justice. It's going to be a pretty high level and hopefully just an encouragement for you to go and read it by yourself. Then, because of the nature of the channel, I do want to compare it with the Bible. I want to talk about how we know which came first. I want to talk about the stories that were clearly borrowed. There's more overlap than you probably even know about. Most people have heard that the flood myths are similar, but my goodness. And then we'll talk about the legacy of this story and we'll be done. And consider some of the following. Here's the last part of the introduction. Knowing that this is written over 4,000 years ago, I want you to see just how human we are, how human we have always been. The things that matter to us now mattered just as much to people back then. This isn't just the first record of storytelling that we have. It's the first philosophical endeavor into what happens when we die or why do we have to die. It's the first bromance. You'll see what I mean here in a second. It's the first adventure tale. And even though it's the first, it flips on its head so many of the traditional storytelling narratives that we see. These stories were preserved across centuries, etched into tablets, memorized and recited long before codes or laws were ever written down. You can get so much from a story, and sometimes when we're talking about the Bible, we have to demote those stories because they're so often anchored to some theology that is so ridiculous and harmful. But since we don't have billions of people still worshiping Anu or Ishtar, we can look at the story for what it is. An entire civilization etched into story, into clay, their anxiety, their search for answers, for hope. So yeah, you can read about Jesus and Moses with all of the theological baggage that comes with it, but then ask yourself when you read this story, why does it feel so much more real? Why is the emotion in this story so much more tangible? And what does that mean? What does it mean when a myth that has no answers for us has endured longer than the theologies that claim to know everything? But I've droned on too long about how much I love this story and how important I think it is. Let's talk about what the story is. And it starts with Gilgamesh himself, a tyrant king, a king that is 2/3 God and 1/3 human. He's tall, he's beautiful, he's powerful, but when we first meet him, he is at his worst. And again, for the first story, what an amazing arc we get to see with our main hero. Let me give you a quote to kick it off. Gilgamesh, who saw the deep, who knew everything, who restored the shrines that the flood had destroyed. And I should probably back up for just a minute and set the stage for how we got this story, what we know about it, etc. The Sumerian origins of Gilgamesh go back to 2100 BCE, with 5 earlier Sumerian poems kind of forming the nucleus. Then we have the standard Babylonian version, that's pretty much what we read today, and it was edited and expanded in Akkadian. The best guesses are that this happened sometime between 1800 and 1200 BCE. I know it's a wide range, but trying to be fair here. Then in a unique twist of fate and irony, it is recovered from the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal, which I did this video on. This is the 7th century BCE, preserved by the very empire whose violence mirrors the tone in the epic. And then it was rediscovered in 1853. Took a few decades to translate, and now we have this amazing story. Back to Gilgamesh, our mainly god but somewhat human king. He's a warrior king, and he's an abusive king. Another quote from Tablet 1 says, "There is no girl left to her mother. The warrior Gilgamesh leaves no virgin to her lover." We could see him as evil, to say the least, and his people, the people of Uruk, by the way, that's where he's king, Mesopotamia, know this. But what are they to do? He's too powerful. If we were trying to tie this into philosophy, he's kind of our Nietzschean Übermensch, the overman, the superman, but without that search for meaning yet. Right now, even at the beginning, he's just got this immortality complex. He believes he deserves power and glory and permanence. But like some great balance, the gods respond to the prayers of the people who are suffering under his tyranny, and they create Enkidu, a wild man, untouched by civilization. He grazes with the gazelles. He runs with the pride of lions. He is part animal, part man, and Gilgamesh is part god and part man, and together they're going to go on a journey to find what it means to be human. It's wonderful. What a cool concept. How deep and rich are the undertones of this story so long before anything else that we claim is so brilliant. But he doesn't stay a wild man. Gilgamesh hears of this powerful man, someone other than himself, and so he sends a temple priestess or prostitute, depending on how you understand these things, to go and find this man. Her name is Shamat, and she does find him, and she spends 7 nights of love with him. And through sex and storytelling and even food, she tames this wild beast. She civilizes him. It's a reverse Eden where it is actually through sex that knowledge is gained. But similar to the Eden story, this is when Enkidu becomes aware of shame, of morality, the difference between right and wrong, and even death. I'm not going to point out every single parallel as we go through this story, but it is unbelievably remarkable that you take this thing that is just in nature in its perfect state, and then through a woman, through femininity, Shamat, Eve, Through sex, food, and story, you get the demise of the innocent wild, and you get the introduction of death and knowledge. Again, I'm going to try not to do this. I just want to cover the story. We will get into the Bible part after the storytelling, so stick with me. So we're going to skip forward. A lot happens, but one of the next major scenes is that after becoming civilized and learning about humanity, Enkidu wants to go and see for himself, and it starts at a wedding. He is kind of hiding in the crowd and observing. And of course, Gilgamesh comes to the wedding to take the bride so that he can have her first. And Enkidu, this doesn't make sense to him. He understands love now, and this is not love. And so they fight. Of course, it is Gilgamesh, though, that causes the violence first. Again, if you look at their two characters and who does what when, it's utterly fascinating. And I am getting some of that from that beautiful 70-page introduction. So please get this for yourself. I'll have both copies linked in the description down below. But they fight. They fight for 7 days, just like it took 7 days of lovemaking for this great awakening. This 7 is repeated throughout the Epic of Gilgamesh, another biblical tie-in for you. And eventually they recognize each other as equals. No one has the upper hand here. And like the beginning of all great romances, they become friends, best friends. And some have indicated that it may have been more than that. 2 great, powerful warrior men, kind of similar to what we see with Achilles and Patroclus. But again, that comes much after. This is the original. But it doesn't matter. What matters, no matter your interpretation, is the emotional weight of their relationship. And for the first time, Gilgamesh sees another as his mirror. He is no longer alone, and this isn't to excuse the actions of Gilgamesh, but in his solitude that came with being 2/3 God and so different and more powerful and more able than the average human around him, it was that loneliness and desperation for true equality or belonging that led to his overreach and abuse. And so now, no longer alone, we follow them on a few different journeys, quest, epic adventures. The main one being going into the cedar forest to kill the guardian or demon of that area, Humbaba, which actually anger the gods in heaven. It's seen as a stand against them. And when they come back to the city to celebrate their victory over Humbaba, Ishtar, probably the most interesting goddess in all of mythology, puts the moves on Gilgamesh, to which he says no. And here's something else that's really cool. I'm just going to back up really quick. Every single female in this story, even the sacred temple prostitute, is put in a light of honor. They are truth tellers. They are gracious. They are strong. They are wise. But Ishtar, who should be the most revered of all of them, not only gets rejected by Gilgamesh, but by both Gilgamesh and Enkidu, insulted. Now, he has good reason for rejecting her. He reminds her that every man she has been with has died in a horrific way, but this does not please her, nor do the insults, and so she sends the greatest monster of all, the Bull of Heaven. And again, together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu prevail. Oh, I should mention, when they killed Humbaba, as he's dying, he puts a curse for one of them to die. But it's Enkidu who will die, as he is the one that delivers the final blow. So he receives the curse, and he dies a slow, cruel, and unjust death. Here he dreams of the underworld, by the way, a place of rest, silence, and dust. Sounds a lot like Sheol. There's no judgment, there's no paradise. There's just the end. So now comes that first existential crisis. Gilgamesh has always been mortal. He's 2/3 God, but he is not immortal. He may have a longer life, a more powerful life, a more brilliant life, but a life that will end nonetheless. And when he sees his equal, Enkidu, suffer this fate, this inescapable end, his awakening begins. And again, I wish I could read to you all of the pages here. It is so raw, the emotion that Gilgamesh goes through at losing Enkidu. He refuses a burial. He cries for days on end. We get quotes like, "What is this sleep that has seized you? You are not listening to me," crying out about the unfairness of it all, which is, of course, how we still grapple with death today, as if we're owed more. It's not just sorrow. This is the first recorded instance of human existential despair at its deepest level. Enkidu was more than just a friend. It is what made Gilgamesh human. But again, it was the awakening that happens here. He says, "Shall I not die too? Was I not like Enkidu?" And so now Gilgamesh, for the first time, even though it's probably something he understood vaguely, is facing his own mortality. And how often does this happen to all of us? We have a youth, we have this invincibility that we feel until we encounter the death of someone close to us, and then we see how real it becomes. So what does he do? He flees Uruk. He's wild, he's unwashed, he's resembling loss, going back to a more primitive nature, like where we see Enkidu begin. And he wanders the world. He's not looking for revenge, not even meaning. He is desperate for immortality. He wants to conquer this. And it's the human condition laid bare. Friendship doesn't last and it can't protect us. Grief is the cost of love, even if love was what made us human in the first place. And so now he wants to break the rules of mortality itself. We'll kind of skip forward a little bit. We get to Siduri's Tavern, a major tableau here in the epic. Siduri is a divine barmaid and a philosopher at the end of the world. And it's here that we get one of the most beautiful and also quietly devastating speech in the entire epic. Let me read it for you. "You will never find that life for which you are looking. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their own keeping. Fill your belly day and night, make merry, dance and be joyful. Let your wife delight in your embrace, for this too is the lot of man." This is proto-everything, proto-stoicism, proto-absurdism, proto-existentialism. It is the first philosophy of dealing with death and meaning. You only get this one life. You can spend it fighting against your nature, what has been allotted to you, or you can embrace it. Even this is echoed biblically in Ecclesiastes, like to a very similar extent. It's a radical idea. Stop trying to live forever and instead live well. And you might hear that and say, yeah, no, that makes sense. But still, is that not what religion does? It is having you try to live forever despite the one life you get. Stop trying to live forever. Make the most of the one life you get. Live well today. Don't sacrifice today for the hypothetical promise of tomorrow. This book is so far ahead of its time, it's unbelievable. And I really believe so much great philosophy has been based, or at least is mirroring or mimicking, this first original story. You guys know that Camus' Myth of Sisyphus is one of my favorite philosophical works, hanging right back there. Sisyphus rolls the boulder up the hill only for it to always come back down again. Gilgamesh is the first to learn this lesson. Meaning must be found in the struggle, not in the destination. In this series, I covered Epicurus and Epicureanism, where we learned that death is nothing to us, and it's the fear of it that poisons life. So we get a little bit of Epicureanism. In Nietzsche, we see that the death of God, of immortality, leads to what eventually becomes a burden, a chaos that will ensue unless we start to create our own meaning outside of that. Even Buddhism is represented here. Suffering arises from attachment, and it's Gilgamesh's grief over the attachment, the love and relation that he had, that first destroys his illusions. But I better wrap up the story here so we can move on. Before we get to his final acceptance of his fate, we still have two main events. First, he meets Utnapishtim. I never say that name correctly. This is the same character as Noah, but he gets some extra benefits in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Here, he is the immortal survivor of the flood. But he tells him, hey, even I didn't earn this. Immortality has to be a gift, not even a reward. You can't have this. It's like this first story covers the entire biblical path, because after we leave behind Sheol in the Old Testament, we go into the idea of heaven and judgment and also hell. But heaven can't be earned. You're not good enough. It has to be a gift, right? So Gilgamesh is forced to learn some hard truths here. He's heard that there is no permanence, that the life he seeks he will never find, and that all men are destined for death. In a hilarious twist that deserves so much more explaining, he actually does find the plant that can restore youth, but a serpent steals it from him while he sleeps. A plant, like a tree. What is the warning in Genesis? Aside from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, there's another tree of life. But what gets in the way of all of this potential immortality? A serpent. It's just unbelievable, you guys. But again, I digress. How does the story end? Well, with all of this knowledge and all of this sorrow, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk. He does return wiser, but not victorious in his quest. The gods did not grant his wish. Insofar as that journey goes, he failed. But he also gained. And what he gained is perspective, and the city becomes the answer. He looks out on his city for the first time with a fresh vision, not any longer as a powerful, permanent, untouchable, godlike man who can take and rape what he wants from it. But now he sees his city, he really sees his city, something built by mortals, not by the gods, as special. Special because eventually it too, like him, will end, but it will last so much longer than him, and instill that quest for legacy, for permanence, for our lives to matter, for meaning to be created subjectively. He sees the answer in his city. It's the metaphor for we die, but our creation lives on. And so we reach the final point in the arc of his character where he decides to invest into his city, to care about it, to make it something special and lasting, to have it be the center point of meaning, that he was here and it was here and that it mattered. So he doesn't conquer death, but he learns to live beside it. What a fascinating, rich, emotional, philosophical telling of the human condition. But moving on to the second part, kind of comparing it with the Bible, I'll try to make this quick. I mean, we could have made this its own episode, and I know many of you would find it very interesting, so maybe we will return to it. But there's always the question of which came first, and it's not really debatable anymore. We understand that the Sumerian poems that give us our basis for the story are around 2100 BCE. We understand that it was compiled with the Babylonian version of this story between, again, 1800 and 1200. When did the book of Genesis reach its final form? The best that we can understand from a scholarly perspective, not what the average Christian will tell you, is that it was compiled during the Babylonian captivity, so 5th to 6th century BCE. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after this had already been put down on clay. And by the way, many mankind themes, many of what we have all gone through, have popped up independently of each other. There are many flood myths from separated societies. There's a reason for that. That's not the case I'm making here. I'm talking about direct borrowing, if not straight up stealing, because the similarities are far too great. And again, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that borrowing or stealing. And I mean, the Akkadians did it to the Sumerians, although much similar and closer in time. It's the claim of Genesis being the first and true version of the history of mankind that makes it necessary to point out the discrepancy here. Let's just talk about the clearest echo, the flood narrative, and I'm just going to have to read this to you. So you have the Noah character in Gilgamesh that is warned by God to build a boat, just like Noah was warned by God. Both the boat and the ark are sealed with pitch. Both main characters bring family and animals. Heavy rains destroy the world. The boat comes to rest on a mountain. In the Gilgamesh version, there is a dove, swallow, and raven sent out. In Genesis, it's a raven, then a dove. A sacrifice is offered afterward. The gods smell the pleasing aroma after the sacrifice. And the flood is originally caused because of the offense to the gods. The funny thing is, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's the noise of mankind, which you could read further into that it's their greed, it's their sin that is distressing the gods, but it's labeled as the noise, where it becomes a little bit more clear in the Genesis account that it's the wickedness of man. But still, gods are offended, and all of this ensues. Again, and this is why I shouldn't have done it as we went through, but the next one I was going to share with you is the serpent and stolen immortality. In Gilgamesh, you have a serpent that steals a life-giving plant. The plant is linked to youth and life, and the result is that mortality is affirmed. In Genesis, a serpent tricks humanity into losing immortality. I'm talking about the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. In both stories, the serpent is the pivot between immortality and human limitation. Those are by far the two clearest, but again, there's so many others. Even the fact of like Gilgamesh being part god, part man, traces to Enochian versions of the Nephilim. Now, you can think that's a stretch, but really it's not. Gilgamesh is not kind to mankind because he's this hybrid. He's a giant among these people, literally, just like the Nephilim. In Genesis 6:4, not even the Enoch version, truly in Genesis, it says the sons of gods went into, slept with, the daughters of of man and had children by them. Both texts are suggesting unnatural unions that lead to exceptionally doomed figures, giants, that eventually have to get divine punishment, and also Enkidu, right? Also, all the divine councils and heavenly politics that are going on in both stories are too similar to ignore. In Gilgamesh, we have a council of gods determining the fate of humans. Have you read Job? In Gilgamesh, gods argue and vote. It reminds me of that scene, I think it's in 1 Kings, where Yahweh is leading his council trying to figure out how to win this next battle, and one of them kind of pipes up and says, what if we lie? What if we deceive them? And Yahweh says, yeah, do that. It could have been a scene from Gilgamesh. And mortals, of course, suffer as a result of what these decisions are, and we see that same thing again specifically with Job, but there's other instances in Psalms and 1 Kings. It's this shared theological anxiety that humans are at the mercy of distant, debating, godlike figures that really ultimately control their fates. Sometimes compassionate, sometimes arbitrary, sometimes malevolent. There's echoes, though not as close, to the Tower of Babel story. There's Sheol, which we talked about, and then an eventual recognition that only immortality can be given as a gift. Enkidu is formed by clay, by the way, the dust of the earth. Again, it is him, the wild man, at the time innocent to his shame, that is constructed in the same way that Adam is, with the exact same storyline. When Enkidu sees the vision of his death, he is eating dust, living in silence. And in the Bible, we are told, to dust you will return. Both made from dust, both sent to dust, ultimately, without judgment, just finality, just end. Just the understanding and recognition of death. So you might say, I don't know, still just seems like coincidence, still seems like we see that in a lot of other places, and I kind of mentioned that before, but I can't tell you. Go and read these things for yourself. I probably have not even done as good a job showing that it's not just similar ideas. It's the structural narrative. It's the linguistic parallels. Then you add into when we know the Genesis account is compiled during the Babylonian exile, placing the Hebrew elite directly in contact with Mesopotamian culture. They absolutely would have encountered the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation story, the Atrahasis, another flood myth, and many more. Genesis is not some solo divine revelation from a perfect God. It, like Job and Ecclesiastes, reflect a literary response to the Mesopotamian culture and texts. It's a revisionist theological project, and it's crystal clear. And so, yeah, I think it's important to understand, especially for listeners of this channel, because if you're here on Thinking Thursday, that's wonderful, but many of you are still in that middle ground of doubting and deconstructing from your faith. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, no matter how much it is debated, makes at least one thing clear. The Bible does not begin the conversation. It inherits it. And also, and this is not debatable, and for about 40% of Christians in America, this would be shocking, humans existed long before Adam, and way before Yahweh ever speaks to Abraham. They were dealing with questions of morality and mortality. This is what we know about myths. They're not erased, they're repurposed. We've seen this with every civilization that has come into contact with another civilization. Why the ancient Hebrews or Israelites would be any different is an absolute desire from a believer, not a fact. So let's quickly close out here just to tie this up in a nice bow. The first thing that I love about this story that is different not just from the Bible, but then so much other myth, is it does not try to give you an answer. Yes, we can see a neat philosophical idea about making our own meaning, but it doesn't tell you what happens after you die or what you need to do when you're alive. It doesn't promise you anything. It represents what we are as humans and the limitations of our knowledge, and that's okay. It embraces its anxiety and fear instead of, because of its anxiety and fear, makes things up to console itself. There's no eternal reward coming. There's no heaven to console us. We are all we have, and that's okay, and it matters. This is what I love about that final scene with Gilgamesh and the ferryman. I don't think I mentioned that. He's telling the ferryman, go up, pace back and forth on the walls of the city. See it now as I do. Gilgamesh is pointing not to a god, not to a relic, but what humans have been able to do together. The walls of Uruk are the real monument, not because they're going to last forever. He recognizes that, but because they lasted long enough to matter. What will you leave behind? What will you be remembered for, even if that doesn't last for all time? What is worthy of remembrance? It's not about permanence, it's about purpose. So I'll end by saying this. The number one reason I love this story, the biggest thing I think we can actually glean from it, is that in Gilgamesh, despite all of his flaws, we get a hero that finally found a way to face death. Not to conquer it, simply to look it in the eyes. That's the most that we can do. Death acceptance is one of the most important parts of being alive. I really believe that. Nothing morbid, nothing that we should focus on and make religions around, nothing that we need to over-spiritualize, just a true acceptance that most of us never do, and especially not until it comes for us. But for me, in my personal philosophy and what I have gained the most from reading these kinds of works, it is to finally embrace this one true thing, which is that it will all end, and that's okay. And so that leaves us with something precious. It is the reverse story to religion. Religion tells you that the only thing death is good for is getting to the next real, better life. Death is good not because it leads to something else, because we don't know that it does and we have no reason to believe that, but because it shows us that our time is finite and thus precious. So that's it for today. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this story of this wonderful book. I hope you get as much out of it as I do. Please, again, grab yourself a copy from the links below. I'll see you Sunday with a new episode. And until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kaboga, Matthew, Perry, Sean, and Steve; my Humanist heroes, Craig, James, Jared, Christy, and Matthew; my Atheist advocates, Adquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.